Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill and I'm here with Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Bill.
What we're going to do today and over the course of many future episodes is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each month we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot and share with you everything that we've learned. And today we are going to be sharing what I've learned, and maybe a little bit of what you've learned.
Just a little bit, I think. Yeah.
About Beaver.
Yeah.
Castor canadensis. And we are at the ideal spot to do that. We are at the Beaver Meadow Audubon Center, where we've recorded quite a few of our episodes previously. But we will not be seeing beaver today.
Their mascot must be a beaver, right? This place is called Beaver Meadow.
You would think so.
What? It's not a beaver?
It is not.
What the heck?
Because Beaver Meadow is managed by the Buffalo Audubon Society.
Oh.
So their mascot is actually a wood duck.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
It's a shame. But
they got the wood part, right? But
we're not going to see beaver today because we are here on a rainy January morning, and I looked when I was driving in and the beaver pond is frozen over.
Oh, okay.
So for people that have not been listening for a while, we should say a little bit about the Beaver Meadow Audubon Center. We're about half an hour southeast of Buffalo, and there's about 400 acres here. As I mentioned, it's managed by the Buffalo Audubon Society. There's about a 40-acre beaver pond that is maintained, at least currently as far as I know, by a beaver colony. And the pond is frozen, so we are not going to see the beaver, but the beaver are hibernating, right, Steve?
yeah, they hibernate. They're one of the true No, they're not.
Yeah.
No.
All right, just wanted to make sure. I didn't know if you knew.
I didn't know. I mean, I did know.
You did know, right?
I did know.
Yeah, so beaver do not hibernate, and we are going to get into that. But I wanted to start off by talking about my first beaver encounter.
Okay.
So when I was in college, this is probably when I was around 20, my friend Herb, who I think we've mentioned on the podcast
we've talked
before,
about Herb.
He was kind of my mentor. He took me on my first real camping trip up into the Adirondack Mountains of New York. So this was around in the mid-90s. So this was before the internet, when you could, just very quickly check trail conditions.
Yeah.
So we went up in April, and we were going to go kayaking through an area called the Bog River Flow.
Okay.
If any of you are looking for a great place to do some flat water paddling in the Adirondacks, can't recommend that place enough. 14 miles of flat water. We've been there.
I was gonna say we've done the Bog River as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to go paddling, especially with little kids, because it's easy paddling, one short carry.
Oh, is that why you brought me?
That's right. Little kids and Steve.
Yeah.
So we drove up there, and the access road to get into the put-in is probably about a quarter mile long. Well, we got up there, and there was still snow up there in April, up in the mountains, and the road was closed, and it was snow-covered. So I'm thinking, we're going to have to turn around and go home. But Herb being Herb, he's like, no. So we took the kayaks down, strapped the kayaks to ourselves, and dragged them down the access road for, at least a quarter mile till we got to the put-in.
Nothing was stopping you guys.
Yeah. So the water was open at that point, so we paddled in, but we paddled in maybe about a mile or so, and there was a massive beaver dam. Now, in my head, this was over 20 years ago, in my head this thing was, 100 yards wide.
Right.
In reality, who knows how big it was?
30 feet,
Right.
10 yards. Yeah.
But we had to pull our kayaks over it, and as we're pulling kayaks over it, a beaver slaps its tail nearby.
Oh.
And I had never,
Yeah.
at this point, seen beaver before.
Yeah.
It had not been in my experience.
And the beaver slap,
It's loud.
Yeah, it's loud, and it creates a pretty big splash, too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at first I'm thinking gunshot.
Right.
When
and he's not kidding.
Herb
Yeah.
gets over laughing. He explains what's going on. But as we're pulling our
I'm
kayaks...
just imagining just a gunman up on a ridge somewhere shooting down at you guys.
I didn't know. This is my first camping trip.
Okay.
So we're pulling our boats across the beaver dam, and the beaver gets out of the water onto the dam and starts advancing on us.
Whoa, okay.
And I look to Herb thinking, well, it's, what's the beaver going to do? And Herb's looking at the beaver, and I could see in his eyes wondering, I wonder if we're in danger right now. So we quickly got into our boats.
I'm waiting for you to pull up your shirt, and there's like just beaver teeth mark scar that you have.
That's the story.
It went straight for the kidneys.
But no, we did get into our kayaks quickly, paddle out, and the beaver did go into the water and followed us for a little while.
There's nothing like being mauled by an herbivore, right?
No. It's funny you should say that.
Okay.
Because
I know it happens.
We will get into beaver attacks during this episode.
Oh, cool. Nice.
So that is coming. But that was my first experience with the beaver.
Wow.
And I was impressed. I still do remember clearly being impressed with how big a beaver is.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think it's the second largest mammal, right?
Very good, yeah.
Because the capybara.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Capybara is bigger.
So our North American beaver, it's the second largest rodent in the world. Only
Followed
behind
by the capybara.
capybara. That's right.
Where are those again?
They're in South America.
South America.
South America.
Okay.
Well, that's where they're native to.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there are other places at this point.
Yeah. So our North American beaver, they do weigh between 30 and 70 pounds, with the record being 110 pounds. They're about 3 to 4 feet long. That includes their tail.
Hold on a second. Second largest. Wait,
Rodent.
Rodent.
Yes.
I didn't mean mammal.
Is that what
because
we said?
I think I may have said mammal by mistake, but I'm sure a lot of the listeners are like, wait a second. And there's grizzly bears. There's, rodent.
I'm glad you
rodent.
caught yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, so they are indeed a rodent.
Yeah.
But they're about 3 to 4 feet long, including the tail. So, I mean, picture a yardstick.
Yeah,
They
that's
can
big.
be even longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
The tail is usually about 8 to 14 inches long, and the width can be 6 inches or less. And in my reading, I did see them referred to as ecological and hydrological Swiss Army knives, which is, I thought, was a great way to refer to them.
Okay, Swiss Army knives. All right.
And that tail, it has multiple uses, like a Swiss Army knife. I think most people know that they use it as a rudder for swimming. I didn't realize.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So-
I guess it makes sense if they just, turn it a little
And
bit.
they even use it for propulsion.
Yeah,
'Cause
I say it makes sense, but it depends on the biology. But I can imagine it. So anytime I say, "Oh, that makes sense," I can just suddenly imagine it. Whether or not it's true. So
You could be easily dissuaded from it.
sure, yeah.
And then they also use it as a balance prop when they're working on land, so almost like a little kickstand.
Okay.
And then, as we've been talking about, to slap on the water. Now, why do they slap their tail on the water?
I imagine it's to freak people out or to get things to move away from their home.
So that
would be my guess.
That was always my initial gut reaction. They're trying to scare whatever.
Don't
it
tell
is.
me it's to attract a mate. 'Cause
No.
Look what this thing can do.
As far as we know, no. But it's to warn other beaver in the colony of danger.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
probably it is meant to scare predators or any potential danger away.
Yeah.
But it seems that the main reason is to signal to other beaver, because there's definitely behavioral changes of other beaver in the vicinity. When they hear that tail slap,
Yeah.
they're on alert.
Beaver and maybe muskrat. Just to,
Now,
yeah. Do they help each other out? I wonder. I don't know.
beaver and muskrat?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to talk about a little
Okay,
bit of
okay.
relationship there. So one of the reasons that I chose beaver as the topic for this episode is, as you know, I always like to take things that I have taught people about for years that
Yeah.
I always thought were true, or I learned from somebody else, and say, is that really true?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're aware about the role I play here at Beaver Meadow of the beaver.
Oh.
Francois, the French.
right. We talked about this a little bit last episode.
The Black Walnut episode.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. So they have a nighttime event here where they have costume characters, and I've played Francois the beaver. And one thing I've always talked about is that beavers store fat in their tails.
Oh. See, I don't even remember that, to be honest.
So I wanted to look more into that. I was 99% sure that I had gotten that from a reliable source.
Right,
but
right.
The speech that I do, I probably wrote it 15, 16 years ago.
Right.
So
you can't even trust yourself from
Exactly.
15 years ago. Yeah.
So they do indeed do that. They do that to make it through the winter. So they start building up the fat supply in their tail in the fall.
Wait, is this what you used to say, or is this the truth, or what we know now?
I'm giving you more details. In the past, I would just say, they store fat in their tails to make it through the winter.
Okay, so this is all relatively verified information. This isn't, you're not about to say, and that was all wrong. Okay.
No.
Okay, good. So they do store fat in their tails.
They do. And the one study I looked at found they could increase their fat supply up to 60% in cold weather. They do eat more in the fall, and then they survive off of that fat when food is less or not available at all. One study found the highest tail fat percentage was in December and January.
Okay.
This led to another thing that I had been told, was that people, especially pioneers and fur trappers, used to eat beaver tail
Oh, okay.
because it was a high fat
Right.
food. Some references say that no, that's not true. But then I did find several references that said, no, you can find, but in Lewis and Clark's journals,
Okay.
as well as many other journals of trappers and pioneers.
Interesting.
And one reference said, long, hard winters were filled with lean, wild game meals, which led to a scarcity of fat in a trapper's diet. One of the more sought-after sources of high-quality backcountry fat was beaver tail. And then I did find a recent article that talked about one of these gatherings of gourmands in New York City where beaver tail was served. And this guy said it was almost completely devoid of actual meat. The white tail fat was delicate and creamy, quite rich and gooey like brains.
Oh, God. I'm sort of picturing like this is the American version of foie gras or something.
Foie gras, yes.
Goose liver. Fattened, super, like hyper-fattened goose liver.
Equally gross, I guess.
Yeah. I've never had it, but I mean, I heard it's delicious, I guess. I don't know, though.
And I also did find, beaver tails are scaly.
I'm almost picturing like a leather, or maybe I'm thinking of like crocodile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alligator.
Alligator, yeah.
It's similar.
Right, and that's what I would imagine it. So, oh my God, this is so gross. The mental images that I'm getting, and I'm so sorry for the listeners, is like, so a thick, leathery hide, and then the fat on the inside, and people just squeezing it out like Go-Gurt, which is one of the most, I apologize if anyone just gagged, but.
We should have had a trigger warning there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I should have done one, but yeah.
Equally kind of gross, depending on your disposition, is you can buy, even on eBay, beaver tail wallets.
Oh,
so
okay.
I saw this reference in the article.
That's more believable than people eating the beaver tail, yeah.
They're charging anywhere from $50 to $300 for
cow.
beaver tail wallets, and you can actually see the scale-like pattern in there. So as far as longevity go, beavers typically live 10 to 12 years, about 20 in captivity, with the oldest on record living 30 years.
Wow.
Now, here's a question. I'm sure you know the answer, but I'm betting some of the listeners.
Well, let's see. I don't know very much about animals in general.
No. Do beavers live in dams?
No.
They do not.
No.
Where do they live?
Well, from my understanding, they use the dam to create a water depth in an area deep enough where they can build a lodge.
Very good.
Because you need a certain depth of water. I mean, just you imagine a puddle, they probably freeze really, really easily, right?
Right.
But if you imagine a deep body of water, you're less likely to get that water to freeze.
Exactly right. So I wanted to make sure I said that because many people associate beavers with dams, but they may not make that connection. The dam is a solid arrangement of mud and sticks.
Yeah, and even you, during your story, didn't you say you were walking over the dam and
Correct.
the beaver came out?
Right.
So, well,
there was a
came
lodge
on
nearby.
top of it. Yeah.
There was a lodge nearby somewhere. So beaver are one of the few animals in the world that can modify a habitat.
Yeah, they're engineers.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because in all the time I've been learning about wildlife, I've seen beaver referred to as ecosystem engineers or keystone species.
Yeah, I've heard both.
Kind of interchangeably.
Yeah.
So an ecosystem engineer, they're species that modify their environment in a significant manner.
Yeah, they're the Beaver Corps of Engineers, as opposed to the Army Corps of Engineers, which is people. So yeah.
So you could think of animals like elephants. Elephants, by tearing down trees to get at the leaves, they keep grasslands as grasslands. You can think of kelp. That's an ecosystem engineer. They create kelp forests.
Right? Okay, yeah.
Plants can be ecosystem engineers.
Right, because you would imagine the ecosystem would change dramatically.
I like that word.
Dramatically. I've said it before, but
it's even more intense than dramatically.
Even more, yeah.
Dramatically.
But I can imagine it's like as if all these trees suddenly disappeared, and how that would change everything. Right. But aquatically.
Yeah, but let's compare that to a keystone species. So the keystone species are species that play a disproportionately large role in the prevalence and population levels of other species within their ecosystem. So there's not a lot of them, but they impact other species very dramatically.
Yeah.
So
I gotta coin that word.
Everybody usually nowadays thinks of the wolves in Yellowstone, right?
Okay, yeah.
Now, there's some debate about how intense that impact is, but wolves and top predators, when they're removed or reintroduced to a system, they do cause that, what we call a trophic cascade, where there's alternating impacts down the food chain.
Yeah, and I know that there is the because people may ask, oh, aren't there other predators in the environment? Like there's certain class of predators called like mesopredators and things like that.
Middle level.
Yeah, but they can't exactly fill the same niche as the top predator.
They can't at all.
Yeah, so so that's what's meant as like this keystone.
Yeah, I mean, look at the woods here.
Yeah,
like this landscape is dominated by deer,
Right.
even though there are mesopredators like coyotes, raccoons, foxes, they cannot control the herbivores the way that a top predator could, like a wolf.
Yeah, and I think I remember sometimes it just comes down to size. Like sometimes like the mesopredators just aren't big enough to take down, and let's say an ungulate of a certain size, like that. The deer is just too big for them, or the moose is too big for them.
And even if they could take down one now and then, like coyotes sometimes do, they are not going to take down as many as a top predator could.
Yeah. So they're not going to get the same response from the predators, which when you talk about like trophic cascades and things like that, you often talk about like prey responses to predators and how they move around an ecosystem and how they browse. And there's definitely big differences between what a top predator is capable of making them do and what a mesopredator is making them do.
They fill different niches.
Yeah.
And for anyone out there who's screaming at their listening device about coyotes and their impact on deer, listen to our coyote episode. We go into it in depth. So the question is, are beaver ecosystem engineers or keystone species? And really, it seems like they're both.
Yeah, I was going to say, why not both?
Because when you look at a habitat that a beaver has created, there's not many beaver there. There's a small population of beaver, but they've had a massive impact and impacted many, many other species by creating that wetland.
Yeah, when I was younger, so my family, I haven't mentioned it in a lot of episodes, shockingly. We own a bunch of property down in the southern tier in New York.
You didn't mention it all the time.
I don't think I mentioned it recently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I used to mention it from time to time. But so on our property, we have a few different streams running through it. And one year, suddenly we noticed that something was different, and we sort of kept exploring down into the woods even further and followed the creek a bit, and there was a beaver dam suddenly. Yep. It totally changed everything, and I'm like, this is horrible, let's destroy the beaver dam. But we never tried, or we never really seriously considered it. But I remember thinking, I was like, oh man, we used to walk this area all the time, and
the beaver ruined it.
Yeah, and the beaver ruined it. So they clearly changed things, right? They changed an environment, at least locally, in a certain area. It very much changed the area. Yeah. But then, years kept going by, and we sort of still liked enjoying going to the beaver dam that, wasn't always there. So,
and arguably they increased the biodiversity of that area.
Yeah, it completely changed the landscape. So, yeah.
And your reaction is not an uncommon reaction when beaver move into an area. So that's one aspect of looking into the beaver that is a whole area I'm not going to get into in this episode. People and beaver and conflicts and management of beaver, because I feel like I just couldn't do it justice in this episode.
Right.
I'm definitely thinking the next episode I might just do a part 2, because there were so many things I just did not have time to do it justice, where I said, I'm not going to be able to talk about it in this episode. So let's get back to the dams. These are made of sticks woven with reeds, branches, saplings. They're caulked with mud. The materials are usually carried or floated, typically wood, stones, and mud, but also they found things like fence posts, crops from nearby fields, even satellite dishes and old kids' toys.
Okay.
Make up part of the beaver dam.
Yeah, those are everywhere at this point.
A lot of what I'm going to say comes from a paper that came out in 2021. It was in Earth Science Reviews. It was called Dam Builders and Their Works, Beaver Influences on the Structure and Function of River Corridor Hydrology, Geomorphology, Biogeochemistry, and Ecosystems. So this was an overview paper, kind of looking
a long title.
But it covered so much ground into beaver and their impacts, and just did an overview of kind of recent beaver research. So this is by a researcher named Annegret Larson. So props to her for putting this together. It forms the backbone of a lot of this episode.
Cool.
She said, a beaver dam creates a peaceful, watery home for beaver families to sleep, eat, and avoid predators. And
so far, this isn't sounding like
I know.
It's very nice sounding. Yeah.
And the effects of dam building ripple outwards with the potential to transform entire ecosystems.
Wow.
Now, that was not in the paper.
Yeah.
But there's a website you may know about called The Conversation, where researchers basically present their papers in a more digestible format.
Okay.
And they will often debate back and forth by writing articles that are in a more general language than their scientific papers.
I was wondering, I was like, maybe because this is you said it's from Earth Science Reviews, which I haven't heard of, but sometimes in reviews, I feel like you can be
a little more flowery.
Yeah, you can be, but it's still science. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, it's all But I feel like I've maybe heard in some intros or discussions, there has to be selling points and hooking the reader still.
Right.
Like science writing is just like any other kind of writing. You still got to hook the reader, but it's all going to be backed up by science.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I like the fact that especially in that website, The Conversation, you have science communication for the general public, but it's being written by scientists. So,
I'll have to look into it because I actually didn't know about The Conversation.
oh yeah, check it out. Now, and we'll put a link into the episode notes. So why build these dams? Obviously, as we already said, it's to help engineer their habitat, but it's mostly to engineer their habitat for food supply. That riparian, that along waterways, the vegetation that they're trying to get to create ponds deep enough to not completely freeze during the winter and to protect themselves from predators. Apparently, beavers generally prefer to build dams across river widths of 20 feet or less. And they also seem to prefer, they can't always get them, but they prefer relatively wide river valleys. And they actually researched this with river valleys where the valley widths are generally more than 4 stream widths across, because they want that pond to be able to spread out and give them more protection from predators. Dams average a few feet to over 330 feet in length. They average about 3 feet high, although they can be larger. And the pond is usually 1.2 to 1.8 meters in depth. I didn't change that one. So what's that going to be? About 3 to 6 feet or so.
Well, 1 meter's 3.2 feet
Yeah.
or something like that. I don't know. It's a little bit more than 3 feet. So.
Right. So they start construction by diverting the stream. Now, in all my time, I had never really learned how exactly do beavers build a dam. In my head, I just kind of assumed, well, they just start piling crap up.
Right. I mean, they're chainsawing the trees down with their teeth, and then then they fall down.
And they fall down. But what they often do, and again, not always, folks, but often what they'll do is upstream from where they want to build, they will fell trees into the water. Yeah. Apparently to slow water flow.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's not like a beaver's going to be moving a whole tree, so it's got to fall in the right spot, to help out.
So they start construction by diverting the stream to lessen the water's flow pressure. Branches and logs are then driven into the mud of the stream bed to form a base, and then sticks, bark, rocks, mud, grass, basically anything else that's available, they are used to construct the dam. The largest dam known in the world is in Wood Buffalo National Park in Alberta, Canada. It's just over half a mile long.
Holy cow, okay.
And it has at least 2 lodges. So
how many meters is that?
2 beaver. I don't know. You can actually look on Google Earth and you can see the pond that's created by the beaver dam. We'll put the coordinates in so you can just cut and paste those.
Yeah.
But I think even if you just type into Google Earth or Google Maps, world's largest beaver dam, it comes up. And they predict that new dams being built could ultimately join with the main dam and increase the overall length by another 300 feet in the next decade. So this thing's going to be massive. Now, what are the benefits of these habitats that beaver create? As we've already alluded to, they can create an incredibly diverse biological community.
Well, wetlands, I feel like wetlands tend to do that, right?
Right.
With wetlands, I think you do typically have lower biomass of, overall, overall
Bodies?
species biomass. I couldn't think of a better way to say that. But you do tend to, even though the biomass is lower, the species diversity tends to be higher, unless you have some type of non-native invader, because that can really heavily lower species diversity.
So wetlands, they occupy only 6% of the Earth's surface, but 40% of the Earth's species make use of wetlands, either for food or for breeding, for shelter. Yeah. So when beaver do this, they're creating habitat for a wide range of aquatic life, providing water and food for larger animals. And some say that ponds created by beaver filter out pollution, store water for use by farms and ranches, they slow down floods, and act as fire breaks or reduce erosion. We'll talk more about some of these claims later on in the episode.
One thing that I've always heard, because I used to do research in the ecology field, I'm not in ecology anymore, but back in the day I would read wetlands tend to help with flooding issues. So they also help with I think it was like temperature regulation too.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, because obviously if you have an area with water, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of joules to change the temperature of water 1 degree. So
and we are going to talk about that. Yeah. So wetlands in general, definitely we could say the things that you're talking about, they do those. But there's some debate, and there's been some debate about, but do beaver created wetlands do this? Like when we talk about floods, think about a beaver dam. Usually when you look at a beaver dam, the water is right up to the top of that dam, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It's usually pretty high.
So if there's a flood, is that beaver dam, holding back that pond, is that really going to be able to mitigate the sudden surge of water that's going to happen?
Can we get to the Beaver Dam? Do you
can.
want to travel there?
Yeah, we can travel.
Yeah, why not? Because, I mean, we're talking about them. It'd be nice to look at one, even if it's, frozen over. We're not really seeing much, but...
Now, I will say, I can't be sure. It's been a while since I've been down there. The trail that leads down to the dam, I don't know if that dam is still there or not.
Okay.
So we'll go and see, though. All right, but as we're walking, let's talk a little bit about the lodges. So the lodges, these are dome-like structures. They're usually about 6 feet high, and they can reach 40 feet wide.
Wow.
But typically they're about 12 feet wide.
Okay.
But they're still big. They're impressive. They can have one or more underwater entrances. And why are they going to be underwater entrances?
Because whatever's on the top of the water is probably frozen in the winter anyway.
Right.
Well, you don't want the top open regardless.
And predators can't get in.
Right.
Right? That's the
yeah,
big
I guess
thing.
I should have,
Right?
when you asked why, I should have given a why.
That's why.
Yeah.
Their living level within the lodge is located above the water line. They're often built away from shore, but not always. And when they are built away from shore, you can think of them as islands that can only be entered underwater. The chamber inside the lodge is usually about 4 feet wide and about 2 feet high, and it's insulated by walls that are 1 foot thick. And it is ventilated by a small air hole in the top, usually called a chimney. And typically the floor is covered in wood shavings for bedding and to absorb excess moisture. Now, I did send you a little short paper yesterday.
I did, yeah.
And did you get a chance to look at that?
Yeah, I read it. I read
This
it.
would be a good chance to talk about it.
Sure,
So what is
yeah.
one of the amazing things about lodges?
One of the amazing things about lodges is that they typically stay above freezing.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, especially when the outside temperature can be well below freezing.
Yeah, the chart in that paper, like, it blew my mind. The huge temperature fluctuations,
Yeah.
like sometimes dropping like 40 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
But inside the Beaver Lodge, it
Oh.
was virtually nothing.
Yeah, pretty solid. And I guess the explanation around that was partly is in the wintertime, you have a snowpack. And when the snowpack's deep enough, we sort of talked about this on the Subnivian episode.
Yeah.
When the snowpack's deep enough, it provides a certain level of insulation.
A high level. of
Yeah. Well, when it's not high enough, it doesn't provide that, because the only times that in the paper where they saw the temperature inside the lodge, the air temperature inside the lodge go below freezing, is during really cold snaps where the snow wasn't deep enough to insulate. But also they noticed during the day the temperature would go down because that's when beavers were out and about being more busy. And at night, when the beavers' bodies were actually in the dam, or sorry, did I say dam?
You did.
Shoot, when they're in the lodge, that's when temperatures would go back up.
Oh. Okay. So this leads us to muskrats.
Okay.
We can talk right now about identifying beavers versus muskrats, because when they're in the water, it can be difficult to tell the difference. When I used to work here at Beaver Meadow, we'd often do full moon hikes. We'd start around dusk, and we'd always start by going down to the pond to see if we could spot the beaver. I can't tell you how many times we used to see a muskrat. And people on the walk would insist that they were beaver.
Right.
And I would tell them, it's not a beaver, it's a muskrat. So we already talked about how big beaver are. And typically when beaver are swimming in the water, you can only see their head.
Yeah.
And maybe just a little bit of their neck and back.
So it's not like they're flaunting the tail, which would be the biggest sign, because a muskrat has like a rat-like tail, and a beaver has a beaver-like tail.
Beaver-like tail. But a muskrat is much smaller. So we said beaver weigh 30 to 70 pounds. Muskrats weigh 1 to 4 pounds.
Oh God, that's such a difference.
They're about as big as a football.
Yeah, but when you're a football field away from these things,
right, it can be hard to tell size because you have no scale. But a muskrat, you can usually see part of the muskrat's back.
Okay.
And often you can see the tail kind of snaking laterally behind it.
Oh, okay.
As it's swimming. There was a one walk that I was leading where some guy was insisting, like beyond reasonableness, that is a beaver. I know a beaver when I see one. And this muskrat, almost as if I had planned it, crawled up onto a log right in front of us.
Yeah.
And you could clearly see it.
It's when it dawned on him, he's like, oh my God, I've never seen a beaver in my entire life. I've only ever been seeing muskrats.
So also I had a volunteer here way back then tell me that they had heard a story that often beaver lodges will become infested with fleas.
Oh, okay.
And so to take care of that situation, what beaver will do is they would leave, allow muskrats to move in. The fleas go onto the muskrats, and then the beavers chase the muskrats out. So,
but how do the beavers get rid of their fleas? They just move on eventually?
well, no,
Maybe they got to be inside
all the fleas are on the muskrats.
I see. So there's none left in the.
So
I don't know. I don't know if I buy it.
it was a good story.
Yeah.
I've looked into it to try to find, is there some truth? I couldn't even find references to this.
Right.
But
no one even wants to try on that one.
the crux of the main weakness in this story is muskrats don't live in beaver lodges. A beaver lodge would be way too big for a muskrat. Because remember, they're tiny.
Right.
They're only 1 to 4 pounds.
And I will say one thing about the thing that I had read was that one thing that helps with these lodges, it's something called like the ratio of the amount of bodies inside the lodge versus the amount of air that's inside the lodge.
Sure.
So you want to really fill the lodge up with bodies as much as you can. Like, you don't want a lot of air in the lodge. And if you're replacing something big with something small, you imagine that would just be a worse ratio.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and remember I said the chambers inside the lodge are typically 4 feet wide by 2 feet high, which is pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
When you're getting several 30 to 70 pound animals in there, it's going to fill up quick.
Yeah.
Now, we already mentioned that beaver are typically nocturnal. They appear at dusk, and that's really the best time to see them, is at dusk or at dawn. In regions where ponds do freeze over, they stay in their lodges or under the ice, using their fat reserves, and then feeding off cache of food that they gathered in the fall. And we'll talk about that more a little later on. Usually that cache is in the lodge or underwater. Now, let's talk about their range.
Okay.
I'm assuming you don't know this off the top of your head. So
I bet I do.
what do you think the range of beaver is?
North America. Wait, beaver or
Castor canadensis, North America.
North
beaver.
America?
Yes.
Well, but not really Mexico. So it's going to be like the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all over the U.S. and Canada.
And then there is one other species, right?
Yep,
The Eurasian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although the North American beaver has been released in Europe in certain areas and in South America where it's become a nuisance.
Okay, I just want to warn you, it seems like we're getting into a little bit of a windier area, so I'm going to try to like reposition myself.
So we have emerged from the woods out to where there used to be a beaver dam here, but there is no beaver dam anymore. There was a beaver dam separating 2 ponds.
Okay, yeah.
But now this is just really one big pond, and the beaver dam is probably a few hundred yards away from us. You can kind of see where the land dips down over there, holding this all in. But why don't we, and as we already mentioned, the pond is frozen. There are beaver probably under the ice, active under the ice at different times of the day or at night. Right?
Whichever they
Why
decide.
don't we go back into the trees?
Whenever they get back on their cycle.
But getting back to their range, they're not found in the deserts of California and Nevada. And there's little parts of Utah and Arizona where we can't find them.
Okay.
But in terms of where they used to be, there was a cartographer and explorer from the 17 and 1800s. His name was David Thompson. He mapped millions of square miles in North America, and he was quoted as saying the entire northern half of the continent was in the possession of 2 distinct races of beings, man and beaver. One eco-hydrologist, a job title I'd never heard of, recently said, prior to European colonization, it's possible that there were beaver in every headwater stream in North America, which kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
We can't know for sure because we're talking about original population of beaver here in North America. We can't be sure really how many there were just because records were tough to keep back then. But it's estimated that the population before Europeans arrived was between 60 and 400 million, which is crazy. Today we think there's 6 to 12 million.
If there was 400 million, there'd be more of them than there is of us.
Right now in North America,
right now, yeah. Definitely back then. But
the fur trade removed most of them. From the mid-16th century, beaver pelts from North America, they were sent to Europe, primarily for making
hats?
Very good. And that continued for about 300 years until around 1830 when silk became preferred.
Oh.
So by the early...
See, we're wearing silk hats right now. For sure.
I love my silk hat.
And silk underwear.
You're wearing underwear? By early 1900s, beaver were scarce, and even in Canada. So there was one record I found in the winter of 1929. After months of scouring the 10,000 square miles around one Canadian trading post in remote prime beaver habitat near James Bay, desperate trappers had found only 4 beaver pelts.
Wow.
And by 1900, there were perhaps only about 100,000 beaver left in North America across the whole continent.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of a pretty typical story for mammals that we like to use for something around the year 1900, right?
And again, we can't be sure. It's kind of funny because there were some stories I read about reintroduction efforts in areas around North America where when the beaver were reintroduced in like the 20s or the 30s, people were saying, oh, there are not any beaver here. But then subsequent research found, well, there probably were beaver here. They were just pretty scarce.
Yeah. So I would say from the very little I did read, that 100,000, I think that sounds like a better situation, at least population number size, compared with the Eurasian beaver. I think that one was brought down even a lot further.
Yes.
But then again, they have a much smaller range, you know.
Right. And remember, that's 100,000 left across the whole continent of North America.
Right. And sometimes when we're thinking about populations, we're not always worried about the number of individuals. We want to know about the genetic diversity between and among populations. So usually there's something that we call effective population size. So let's say, as a crazy, maybe not realistic example, but you could have an effective population size of 1 or something, but a population size of 100,000.
Sure.
It's just that you have all these individuals, but there's no real genetic diversity among the population. So that population would probably be
doomed to
in
failure.
a lot of trouble. Yeah. So
close to entering the extinction spiral.
True.
The coolest ecological name ever. So the beaver, they're really a rare example of an animal that was severely impacted by humans. But when you look at the historical range and the current range, it almost overlaps completely. So they really have moved to inhabit most of the areas they were previously, just not in the numbers that they were in previously. But there's one caveat there that we can't really be sure of the exact boundaries of their historical range, again, because records were so limited and they were being removed at such a tremendous rate.
Yeah.
So let's talk about taxonomy. We promised to talk about this. So they are in the family Castoridae, which includes all modern beavers and their fossil relatives.
Must be a lot of
and
all of them.
All of them.
Okay.
And as you said, there's only one genus, Castor. So the 2 species are Castor canadensis. And do you know what castor means?
No.
Beaver.
Okay.
So it's the Canadian beaver.
Got it.
And then there's the Eurasian beaver, which is Castor fiber.
Fiber, okay.
Fiber. The European beaver has a larger square head.
Latin for Europe.
I think you might be right.
The fiber beaver. The Canadian beaver and the fiber beaver. Yeah.
And the European beaver also has a longer, narrower muzzle. They look a little strange, being used to North American beaver.
Okay. What's that dog with the really long muzzle?
The greyhound?
Yeah. It's the greyhound-like face. That'd be
Do
kind
you
of funny.
think they can mate?
Well,
I mean, they can mate, but can they produce viable offspring?
I'll just say yes. I just assume that maybe they would be able to. I don't know.
So for some reason in Russia, they made more than 27 attempts to hybridize the 2 beavers. And the best result they got was 1 stillborn kit.
Okay.
That was it. All right, so now we're going to talk about their social structure, reproduction, development. Beaver are monogamous. Each group is made up of 1 breeding pair. The young are usually referred to as kits. So each group has the mom and dad, the breeding pair, the kits that were born this year, and then the kits from last year, the yearlings, which I came up with a name for them. They're called the grandkits.
The grandkids, even though they're the older ones.
Right. Oh, that's true. I didn't think of that. Now, did you know it's difficult to differentiate sexes in beaver?
I guess I would have assumed that. I can't imagine sexual dimorphism between the sexes.
Males do not have external genitalia. So I found one author who said, if you're an animal that spends its life swimming around log jams, you don't want any dangling bits that can get snagged.
Yeah. You know what? Something happens to humans a little bit when we're swimming in cold water.
That's true.
To different extents to different people. But.
You can identify the females if they are lactating, but if they're not, the only reliable way to sex them, and I wish we had one here so we could have Steve do this on mic, would be to push out their anal glands. And then you squeeze out a little dollop of the secretion they use to mark their territory.
Oh.
And you have to sniff it.
Okay.
If it's
Who discovered this?
I don't know. So if it's a male, their secretion smells like motor oil. If it's a female, it smells like rancid cheese.
What the heck?
Now, this oil is used to waterproof the beaver's fur. So they do use it for that. They have, around their anus, they have oil glands, but then they also have castor glands, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. So they typically breed in midwinter. So right now, the beavers that are nearby may be getting it on right now as we speak.
Nice.
The 2 to 5 kits are usually born May to June. They're about 1 pound. They're born with eyes open, furred.
Whoa, so they have like a 5 to 6 month pregnancy, whatever it's called, gestational period? Wow.
And the kits do have fully developed teeth. They take to the water inside the lodge within a half an hour after birth. They're skillful swimmers within about a week, but this is so cute. They're too buoyant to dive.
Oh, God.
And folks,
they're just floating around.
Yeah.
Just
trying to swim down.
I imagine they're floating. They're born in the summer, so they're just helplessly floating around the top of the water, which I imagine would be dangerous. So maybe they
easy to pick up.
Yeah.
Folks, you got to stop the podcast right now, and if you're able to, look up some videos of baby beaver, because they are the cutest thing you have ever seen. They have a tiny little tail. It looks like a toy tail. On land, mothers often carry their kits on their broad tails, sometimes even walking a wreck and holding them in their paws, and that's another, like,
I have to imagine that would be a good video to
kills
watch
you with
too.
cuteness,
Yeah.
watching a baby beaver being carried by its mom. In the water, kits may rest.
That's the beaver strategy. Like, some humans are like, kill them with kindness, but beavers are like, kill them with cuteness as they're being picked off by eagles.
The eagles would pause and say,
like,
I can't. Kits may rest upon their mother's back in the water. And as I think I already mentioned, they remain with their parents for 2 years, helping with lodge and dam maintenance, raising the next generation of kits, until they're usually driven away just before the birth of a new litter. Now, talking about
their parents aren't really all that thankful.
What do you mean?
Because it's like, thanks for raising them, but it's like, you got to get out.
Right, they're saying.
Get a job.
It's time.
Yeah.
You got to go out on your own.
In this economy?
So I feel like I have to step back a little bit, because I didn't mention when we were talking about the beaver tail. Beaver do not carry things on their tail. They don't pat down the mud with their tail.
Okay. You know what? I have a memory of seeing a cartoon of a beaver slapping like mud and stuff, and
many
maybe it was
cartoons.
Like an old Hanna-Barbera or whatever it was, cartoon or whatever. I feel like I can picture it, but I don't know where from.
Right, and that's why I have to mention that.
They do carry some stuff on their tails. Like they're young.
Like they're young, yeah. But usually not lodge materials, okay?
just imagining like a pickup truck.
Once here at Beaver Meadow, when the dam was in place, you used to be able to walk across the dam.
Oh, yeah.
And directly across the water from where we are, there was a beaver lodge there for decades.
Wow.
Because there were pictures in the 60s, and then when I was here in the 90s and early 2000s, the lodge was still there. And sometimes in the evening, I'd walk over there. And one night I did hear kits inside the lodge creating these little whines.
Oh, I was going to say, what noise do beavers make?
I'll put some in post-production.
Okay.
But the kits, they make these little whines to communicate needs to parents, to communicate with each other. The adults do hiss. They can make little whining sounds.
My
hissing
cat
is
does
usually the hissing is usually for disputes. And then, of course, there's the tail slap. That's the other way they communicate. They also communicate outside of their sounds by depositing scents, which I already mentioned.
Right. The rotten...
The motor oil or the rancid cheese.
Right.
This is unique among rodents, building these scent mounds. I've never been able to find one. I haven't done all that much looking, but I've heard about them over the years. These are heaps of mud, sticks, grass, pond material. They can be up to 1 foot high and 3 feet wide, although they're usually smaller, on which they deposit the scents from those anal glands. Now, I'm running into a discrepancy here in my notes, because I mentioned that they have 2 different types of those anal glands.
Yeah.
One's for the oil, and then one is for this material called castoreum.
Right, so you said there's the oil glands and the castor glands.
So I'm going to have to put this in the episode notes, because in my notes here, I just noticed when I was talking about the oil glands, the ones that smell like motor oil or rancid cheese.
Yeah.
In my notes, it does say they use it to mark their territory. But then later on in my notes, it says, like, unlike the oil that smells like motor oil or rancid cheese, the castoreum is used to mark the scent mounds.
Oh.
So I'm gonna have to find out which one is for which.
Right.
So this castoreum.
So do they when they're trying to communicate, they're not only they're waterproofing a small little spot, and they're communicating.
and they're communicating. Well, maybe they don't want the rain to wash it away.
Yeah.
So this castoreum.
To be honest, that kind of sounds
logical.
if true, pretty cool.
Yeah. Some of our listeners may have heard of this because every once in a while, an article will pop up on the internet saying that vanilla has beaver butt juice in it.
Oh.
Because the castoreum does have a vanilla scent to it. Now, there have been times in history when it was used to flavor foods, but it seems that that's a very rare thing. And in any vanilla you're going to find in grocery stores is not going to have this in it. But it has been used in perfumes before for some reason. So apparently
perfumes have a history of using weird stuff, right?
Right.
Isn't there like some weird thing that a whale deposits or something that they use in?
I don't
there
know
was
what
some
you're
type
reading,
of
Steve. I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe in the notes. I don't know.
Future episodes. Have it.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to get into their food and eating habits, but now is a good opportunity to take a little break and talk about Gumleaf.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about Gumleaf USA.
Yeah.
They're a frequent sponsor of the podcast, and we usually try to take a moment during each episode to mention their product. They make Wellington-style tall rubber boots.
Yep.
And Steve and I both have pairs that we are fond of.
And they keep your feet dry. I think they're sort of fashionable, especially some of the newer designs. Didn't they have a bunch of different colors and stuff too?
Yeah.
I say newer, but they've been around for a little while.
They have.
Yeah.
And I want to give a shout out to listener Chris Root, who's a friend who has come with us on Christmas bird counts.
Yep. More than me at this point. I think I missed 2 years in a row. But this year, I literally couldn't have gone. I was stuck inside my house because of a snowstorm.
Stay focused.
Yeah.
But Chris, on the Christmas bird count, he talked about how he recently got a pair of Gumleaf boots.
Nice.
And how much he loves them. So
should have brought Chris on the episode to talk about it.
If you would like these boots, they do cost a little bit more, but folks, they are such high quality. They last a lot longer, do a much better job for you than similar looking boots that are a lot cheaper.
Oh yeah.
We really can't talk about how much we've loved using our boots.
I used to do a lot of wetland work, and so I would just use a bunch of the boots they had sitting around the field station.
Yeah.
I will say the Gumleaf boots are a billion times
Way
better.
better.
And you could quote me on that. They're a billion times better.
So check them out at gumleafusa.com, and if you are a patron of the podcast, you get free shipping on your order. All right. So let's talk about what beaver eat. You already mentioned that they are what?
Herbivores.
Herbivores. So
just like humans. Just kidding. I argue with vegans online all the time.
Even though vegans like yourself?
Yeah. So I believe in something called infighting. So whether I'm talking with other vegans or other people who are, similarly politically leaned as me, I'm arguing with them all the time.
So even though they live in aquatic habitats, they are not eating aquatic animals. They're eating mostly leaves, woody stems, and then they do eat a lot of aquatic plants. Things like water lilies during the summer months. They are not eating many woody plants. They're eating mostly green aquatic plants.
Okay.
And like all rodents, beavers have self-sharpening incisor teeth that never stop growing. So the outer surface, I looked this up because I told people this. I knew that their teeth were self-sharpening, but I didn't understand how. So apparently the outer surface of the teeth.
Self-sharpening?
Yes.
See, I didn't know this. So what I've always heard is that beavers, their teeth never stop growing, but they have to keep chewing on wood in order to keep the teeth from growing
too big.
Oh, when you say self-sharpening, are you just saying the way that the teeth, when they're shaved off, they have such a internal structure where it's going to shave off in a way that keeps them sharp?
Correct.
Oh,
Yes.
that makes sense.
So the outer
if I
surface-
designed them, that's what I would do.
Intelligent
I guess.
design. So the outer surface is protected by tough enamel, but the inner surface, the part we don't see, is softer, and it wears away as the beaver gnaws. So the inner surface wears away faster than the outer surface, and the outer surface will kind of crumble. So that keeps a sharp, chiseled edge.
Okay.
I'd heard that beavers have iron in their teeth. That's why they're orange. And I looked up, and apparently that is true.
Really?
And
Okay.
that's what serves to make the outer edge of their teeth even tougher.
Interesting. Okay.
What part of the tree do the beaver actually eat?
I would assume, because when you look at beaver chew, what do they actually eat?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, when you look at beaver chew, it always starts as girdling the tree. At least that's what it sort of looks like. Do they fully girdle it? Because when you think of insects and when you think of some birds like sapsuckers and things like that, what they want is they want the vascular tissue because that has the sugars in it. That has, obviously, there's water, there's sugars, there's some other nutrients there.
So you're talking about the phloem.
Yeah.
Just under the bark.
Right. Well,
and
so
the cambium.
Yeah, right. And for people that don't know, the way you can think of the phloem, so the phloem is what's coming down from the leaves. And it's
the phloem transports the food from the leaves.
Right. Yeah, what's in the phloem is the sugars that are created during photosynthesis, and that flows down the tree. So that's where you remember phloem from. And that's typically what things that feed on sap are interested in. They want the sugars, they want those nutrients there. But beavers, they eat all the way into the tree.
Right.
Well, I was going to say, they don't stop with the outer layer, which is the vascular layer, those outer layers. They go in, but they also like to have trees fall. So are they eating the inside of the tree, or are they just doing it because they want that tree to go down? Well, I don't know.
I'm going to tell you. This is an area, again, where I saw that I could do more research into it, because what you're talking about, girdling the tree.
Mm-hmm. So when I talk about girdling, that's a way that people kill trees as well. So
you remove a ring of bark.
Yep. And that just cuts off the water flow from the roots, and that'll kill the tree.
So beavers, when they're girdling a tree, a lot of times, depending on the size of the tree, they won't take the tree all the way down. They'll girdle it and cut into it to a certain point, and then kind of let gravity do its work.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of papers I came across that looked into the placement of beaver cuts on trees.
Yeah.
Because people say, oh, beavers always know how to cut a tree so it falls towards the water.
So I don't cut trees down. Like my family and I have done it a lot in the past, done it on our property, but I don't remember how we used to chainsaw the trees to make them come down.
Dumbass way and just make a cut, and whatever way it falls, it falls.
Yeah, well, to be honest, sometimes we would tie a rope to the tree onto an ATV and try to make sure it's pulled. There's like a tight rope pulling in one direction to make sure it goes the way.
There's lots of great YouTube videos.
I was going to say, but I think that's an easy way to maybe die.
The best laid plans, right?
Right.
All right, so I'm not going to get into that too much, though, because I want to be able to do that justice. So maybe we'll do that in part 2. Mm-hmm. But I do want to talk about what they're actually eating. I just want to say one thing. Yeah.
This ATV trick, I feel like we've used it so few times that I don't even know how to count it. It would be less than on one hand.
Okay.
But for the most part, because my family does cut a lot of wood, and because a lot of us have wood stoves and stuff, we do it the proper way. It's just that I don't do it enough to where I'm usually the one splitting it at the log splitter. I'm not the one bringing the tree down.
No one trusts you with the chainsaw.
Yeah. I just want to let you guys know my family's not a complete group of idiots, but or a group of complete idiots anyway.
Either way.
Yeah. But
a complete group of
I don't want to lose all my credibility because I said we use an ATV to pull trees in a certain direction.
So getting back to beavers and taking down
trees.
One
more thing about
you got to remember that when they're taking down a tree, there's 2 purposes they're going to use that wood for. One is for the dam and the lodge, and then the other is to feed on.
Yeah.
So
that's why I couldn't figure it out, because I'm like, why are they eating into the middle of the tree? That's usually people. Animals typically, I feel like, aren't interested in the middle of a tree.
If they're eating to the middle, they're taking down that tree.
Yeah, for sure.
If they're feeding, they're going to strip off the outer bark to get to the inner bark.
Okay.
To get to the phloem.
So it is the phloem that they want.
It is the phloem that they want, and that cambium layer, that sheath of living tissue.
Right. Right. Because the only thing living on the tree are those outer layers.
Right.
Yeah.
And for a further description, folks, of the structure of a tree, listen to our sap episodes.
Yeah.
Because we really get into it then. So they're stripping away the outside bark, and they're eating the inner bark and that cambium layer. That's what they're going for. The actual wood, the xylem of the tree, the hard stuff, it's very hard to digest and will not be eaten. The chief building materials that they're going to use for their lodge and their dam are also their preferred foods. Poplar, aspen, willow, birch.
Okay.
What's similar about all of those trees? Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
Poplar, willow, aspen, birch. Bill's trying to give me hints.
Yeah.
I'll just let him say it.
They grow fast. Right?
Oh, grow
So
fast.
they're going to be a softer hardwood.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But maple is also one of their favored foods as well. I did try to look up which is their favorite food, because some articles I read said, oh, hands down, willow's their favorite food. Other articles said aspen is their favorite food.
But I was going to say, so I know willows and birches, they don't mind getting their feet wet a little bit.
Depends on the birch.
Depends on the birch. Yeah. Maples, maybe red maples are more likely to get their feet wet.
Yeah.
Cottonwoods
are poplars.
Yeah, right. That's all the same genus. Yeah, they're definitely getting their feet wet, because I'm just thinking we have a place near us called Tift Nature Preserve, and it's all that's there are cottonwoods.
Right.
And they're in a pretty wet spot. So.
And I just realized I said poplar and aspen. Well, aspen's a kind of poplar.
right. Populus tremuloides or deltoides.
You don't need to send in an email.
Yeah.
Okay. We did get an email from somebody asking about responding to our black walnut episode, asking why don't beavers like black walnuts? He said that they seem to avoid black walnuts. I tried to find anything on this.
Yeah.
So Don, I'm sorry, I couldn't find a reason for it. The only thing I could think is that maybe black walnuts don't typically grow too close to water. They're outcompeted by other things.
Yeah, maybe.
Because remember, folks, beaver are building that dam, creating the pond for protection.
Yeah.
On land, beaver cannot move very quickly, so they're not going to stray too far from the water.
Yeah.
Now, we already mentioned during winter, there is no hibernation, and they're predominantly feeding on woody plants that they've cached. Remember, they spend their winter inside the lodge and under the ice. I always taught people that beaver in the fall, they'll take branches with leaves and stick them in the mud on the bottom of the pond. And that acts, the cold water acts as a refrigerator.
Oh.
Sounds good, right?
Yeah, I guess it does sound good.
So I looked into it, and I did find some references to the fact that the cold water does preserve the nutritional value of some species.
Okay.
Not all species. Some species, the water, the moisture is going to break them down, but some species, yes, it does preserve the nutritional value for a longer period of time. And they do, I had to put in, they do hold their food with their front paws, eating the branches corn on the cob style.
Nice.
So let's get into what beaver can do and their benefits. There's clear evidence that beaver dams increase water storage in river landscapes, and they create more ponds and wetlands, raising groundwater levels.
I was going to say increase water storage. I feel like, of course, right? Like,
that's obvious.
Yeah.
So all this extra water that the dams store, they could help rivers and their inhabitants handle weather extremes, especially with climate change. During floods and droughts, they could act as critical refuges for fish, amphibians, insects, birds. And then thinking of human benefits, we already mentioned this a little bit. Some think beaver complexes could reduce floods and their impacts. This is a relatively new concept. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that beaver dams actually make floods worse, because during floods, the dams will fail, and then you get the flood water and all the pond water coming down. So there have been some...
I didn't consider that.
There have been some recent studies. In 2020, there was a paper that came out, and it recorded during a June 2013 rainstorm that triggered the largest recorded flood in the Rocky Mountains in Alberta. Researchers, they'd been monitoring a beaver peatland for more than a decade, and they wanted to answer the question, do beaver have a limited capacity to reduce flood impacts? They set up instruments to record water levels, weather information during this big rainstorm that they knew was coming. And they wanted to find out, do beaver dams commonly fail during large flood events? So they monitored several ponds, a bunch of dams, and they found that the majority, 70% of the beaver dam systems across the region were intact or partially intact after the event. So this occurred despite reports that these dams tend to fail. Water storage offered by the beaver ponds, even ones that failed, delayed arrival of those floodwaters downstream.
I was going to say, when you say something typically fails, I would kind of think like 30%. If someone said that and I found out that 30% of the time they were right, I would kind of give them be like, you know what? That wasn't a bad assessment.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Now,
30% is kind of a big percent of the time.
It is, but 70%.
70% is even bigger.
Much bigger.
Yeah.
So this tendency to delay the arrival of floodwater downstream, remember we talked about how the beaver dam, the water was usually up right up to the top?
Yeah.
Okay, so we thought, well, yeah, if there's floodwaters coming, it's just going to overtop it. But they found that usually that delay, it wasn't because the ponds held the water, it's because the water was able to spread out into the floodplain beyond the pond.
Okay.
Typically.
Yeah.
So remember, we
Makes
talked
sense.
about beavers prefer areas that are river valleys that are wide.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's because they know during a flood that the waters are going to spread out.
It's a happy accident.
Yeah, that's right. So their findings said that while beaver dams are unlikely to provide 100% flood protection, they can store water for a time even in large rainfall events, and that this nature-based solution should be included in regional water management strategies. And let's talk about pollution now. Beaver dams, obviously, they increase the time it takes for things to move downstream. Could this help slow the spread of pollutants like nitrates and phosphates commonly used in fertilizers, which can harm fish and damage water quality? Now, if you just do a quick search online, you'll see a lot of sites claiming that beavers are great for limiting water pollution. But beavers' impact on phosphates is unclear. There are just as many studies finding phosphorus concentrations increasing downstream of beaver dams as those finding a decrease or no change. But they do seem to have an effect on nitrates. One 2015 study showed how beavers seem especially skilled at removing this one. Organic matter builds up in the beaver ponds, and bacteria in that matter in the soil transform the nitrate into nitrogen gas. So this is denitrification, removing it from the ecosystem. This process, this study found, can remove 5 to 45% of the nitrates in the water, depending on the pond and the amount of nitrogen present. So this is a welcome skill, since high concentrations of nitrates in drinking water is especially bad for infants, for the very young, but also nitrates are some of the components that help to generate algal blooms, which lead to dead zones. So the evidence seems to definitely indicate they are beneficial at removing nitrates. We're still not sure their impacts on phosphates.
Well, maybe we need more beavers in Lake Erie then, because don't we get some pretty awful algal blooms, especially on like the western end of Lake Erie, that create big dead zones?
Yeah, but how are you going to get a beaver in a Great Lake?
That's what I'm saying. You just got to keep helicopter,
just
dropping them. we have to start breeding them to really like lakes.
Now, we've mentioned several times about how beaver increase diversity, right? All that water storage that beavers are doing creates a wonderful mosaic of still, slow, and fast-moving watery habitats. So, in particular, it does seem they increase the biodiversity of river valleys. For example, helping macroinvertebrates like worms and snails, big part of healthy food chains. And a beaver's departure can leave anything from fens or peatlands to wet floodplain forests, and also to drier grassland meadows, depending on the habitat that was there when the beaver moved in. This gives beavers an important role in rewilding efforts. But nuance is key here. Evidence of beaver dam impacts on fish populations and river valley vegetation is very mixed. They're agents of disturbance.
I can imagine if there's a fish that requires traveling to making their complete journey, like salmon and things like that, I can imagine that would be a problem.
Let's talk about that, because I started to look into it, and that's a topic that I feel deserves its own section in an episode. But just to say briefly, for many years, people believed that beaver were bad for salmon and seagoing trout species because they prevented them from migrating. Their dams prevented them.
But so did glaciers, and the salmon just keep coming back. Glaciers are the beavers of the north.
The beavers are in the north.
Oh yeah, right. They're the ice
glaciers of pre-beaver time.
Ice beavers are glaciers. And the salmons are, they come back. They bounce back. So maybe they could bounce back.
But we're talking about human timescales here. So there's more recent evidence suggesting that when beavers do create ponds, they create slow-moving areas, that can benefit salmon. We're going to get into that in another episode some point in the future. But with what I mentioned a few moments ago about beavers being agents of disturbance, that can promote plants that germinate quickly, like invasive species. Woody shrubs and grasses that can reduce forest cover and help some invasives. Given time, it can also help create valleys with a far richer mosaic of plant life. So although beaver presence is likely to bring benefits, more research is needed to get clear info on precisely how beavers change ecosystems. And those changes, they're likely to be different between different ecosystems and habitats. So avoid those blanket statements.
Sure.
Let's talk about their role in carbon, because they play a complex role in carbon dealing with climate change. A 2018 study suggests that beaver dams and the sediments corralled behind them sequester carbon, temporarily keeping it out of the atmosphere. But when the animals abandon those sites, the carbon leaks back out, which contributes to global warming. Overall, more carbon seems to be trapped than released by beaver activities. Because remember, when they abandon one area, most likely they're just going to go build in another area.
Right.
But a clearer understanding of where beavers fit, continent-wide especially, within the carbon cycle of river systems is needed if we're to make best use of their carbon capture skills. And that actually leads to the last study that I want to share.
Yeah, and maybe as we're going through this study, do you want to
Oh yeah, let's
walk again? Yeah.
So this study, I heard about it on a podcast. Reading about it, I thought, oh, we should do an episode on beaver. So that kind of kicked this off. This is a 2022 study about expanding beaver pond distribution in the Arctic. So researchers, they looked at aerial photographs, satellite photography of the northwest portion of Alaska from 1949 to 2019. Beaver were never thought to live in the Arctic. But using those 70 years of images, researchers found the construction of over 10,000 beaver ponds in western Alaska, most of the growth since 2003.
You know, I mean, and Alaska's a pretty wooded place, right?
No, this is in the tundra.
Oh, tundra.
This is in the
Wait,
tundra.
so what are they making the...
Well, let me get to that.
Okay.
So the Arctic, it's heated up 3 times faster than the global average. Winters are shorter, there's more unfrozen water in streams, and there's more shrubby vegetation growing now.
Oh, okay.
So that has allowed beavers to find habitat in this area where they couldn't before.
Wow.
It's hard to tell how much of them might just be reclaiming some former range, and how much is climate change encouraging them into new areas.
Okay.
Because again, there's not reliable records about whether beaver were in these areas, but it seems highly unlikely because there were no trees. So you look at some of these pictures, and what used to be a squiggly line of a creek now looks like a chain of beads with all these beaver ponds behind dams.
Wow.
And when you put a pond on a stream or on pre-existing tundra vegetation, it absorbs heat more readily. This goes into what you were talking about. Warmer water is going to thaw permafrost, releasing carbon that's been trapped for millennia.
Now this is engineering.
Right. So much of this landscape might go from tundra to something more like boreal forest.
Wow.
And at the end of the winter, when you still have liquid water at the bottom of these ponds, it's almost like having a groundwater spring. You're going to have species in that stream that can suddenly survive year-round.
Wow.
Where they never could before. There's no other animal that has changed the Arctic so much, so fast, except for humans.
Wow.
All right, and
what a hill.
We're walking up a hill here, folks. But I'm glad I shared that story.
Yeah.
I was kind of debating because I know this episode's a little long, because I almost forgot to talk about beaver attacks.
Oh, yeah, we promised. Got to deliver.
So, beaver attacks are relatively rare, but when they do happen, it's usually because one of two things. More frequently, it seems to be because of a beaver that has been infected by rabies.
Oh, well.
But there have been some attacks that it's thought they were territorial. They're rarely fatal. And again, folks, you could probably count on 1 or 2 hands the number of beaver attacks that have been recorded in North America or Europe. But at least one beaver attack on a human is known to have been fatal. A 60-year-old fisherman in Belarus died in 2013.
Whoa.
After a beaver bit open an artery in his leg.
No way.
Now, apparently the Belarusian media at the time, they described it as the latest in a series of beaver attacks on humans in the country. Because apparently there is a beaver population there that's increasing. But, however, there were some reports that the victim likely provoked the attack when he grabbed the beaver in an effort to take a photo with it.
Oh, no.
So, there's some good advice there. Don't try to get us.
I was going to say,
the beaver.
Did you read about that one in the Darwin Awards or just the newspaper?
That was Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, yeah.
So who knows how true that is.
Right.
So I would say, going back to the original story that we started with, I don't think that beaver probably would have attacked. The chances are slim, but I am glad we got off the dam and got into our kayaks before I could find out. All right, so I think we're definitely going to do a part 2 at some point in the future. It may not come next. But for a wrap up, I want to give a few shout outs. One, it's a bit of a sad one. I just wanted to share with our listeners that friend of the podcast, Jerry Rising, passed away. He was on our
Witch Hazel episode.
Witch Hazel episode. He did a write-up about us in a local magazine here in Buffalo.
Yeah.
He was always very kind to the podcast.
He was a great guy, yeah.
A great nature writer, and we'll put a link to his collected nature writings. I'd encourage the audience to go check them out.
Yeah.
I also wanted to share an email and give a thank you to Danielle. Her email started with chocolate dinosaur. She wrote, after listening to the bird banding episode, saying she found a kestrel band and reported it.
Cool.
So thanks for doing that, Danielle. And then Crystal Van Laer and her son, they have been fans of the podcast, and we helped fire up her interest in plants, and she recently went back to school.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was a good one to get.
Yeah, that's exciting.
All right, and I'm going to have you talk about the patrons.
Yeah, so we'd like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you to our new patrons, Connor D. Higgins, Don Scalin, and Emily Krill L.
Yeah, so Connor, you know him.
Oh, Connor. Yeah. I didn't know Connor's last name for some reason.
So we say hi to Connor. He's a friend of ours. And then Don, he's the one that wrote about squirrels and black walnuts. He left a nice lengthy comment on our black walnut episode.
Yeah.
And he lives just outside Toronto.
Cool.
So he had a lot to share. So thank you, Don.
Who pointed out that I say both wrong?
That's coming up.
Oh, okay. We like to give a special shout out each month to our top patrons, so stick around for the end of the episode to hear Bill's daughter Violet share that list. And remember, if you'd like to be part of the Field Guides and read our patron list in a future episode, email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron of our show at patreon.com. As a patron, you'll get access to a special patron-only version of our episodes that includes Bill sharing the episode notes. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's
so
true.
This is a new thing?
It is.
Nice. And because of the support of our listeners, we've been able to keep the show free and make cooler episodes like Insectapalooza, or you can make a one-time donation through PayPal on our website. So a big thank you to Don Scalin for his generous donation in September. And don't forget that we have Field Guides merch available through our website store at thefieldguidespodcast.com. And remember, if you can't financially support the podcast, you can help out by sharing it with friends and family and by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps spread the word and allows us to reach a wider audience. So we'd like to thank our newest iTunes reviewers, Holo Grandpa. Apparently this is who pointed out that I can't say both right. I say both, like with an LTH. Is that a regional thing, or do I just do that? I have no idea.
It's just a Fleck thing.
I guess it's just a Fleck thing, yeah. Also, thank you to Viashano16, or Viashano16, yeah. GWet17 or Gwet17. I'm going to do this with all these. Extra Elvis, I'm not going to do it, that one. MGM Rena, and Bunny Girl 33.
Yeah, so I made a little notation there because Bunny Girl 33, she came on an event I did. Here at Beaver Meadow, the day after Thanksgiving, there was a special event called Opt Outside.
Okay.
So the idea was instead of going shopping, you could do something outside. So Outside Chronicles put that together. Folks, Outside Chronicles is a friend of the podcast. Our friend Mike Radomski runs it. Check him out at outsidechronicles.com. He runs a hiking challenge here in Western New York, helps raise money for local conservation efforts. Yeah. In the past few years, he's raised over $200,000 for places like Buffalo Audubon here and the Western New York Land Conservancy that we've worked with.
Cool.
So check him out. His model for raising money for conservation funds and getting people outside is an incredible model that really anyone can implement in their area. Yeah. So check out outsidechronicles.com. But he had me come out, and they had a series of hikes on that day, and I led one of the hikes. And the people that came with me, I started off by asking, who's heard of the Field Guides podcast? And not a single person had heard of us.
Wow.
But I encouraged them. I think I gave out some cards, or maybe I just told them where to find us. And she said that she found us because of that event.
Nice.
Yeah, so
cool.
Thanks for tracking us down.
Well, I mean, you can track us down in person, I guess, from time to time. Or you can come enjoy our sporadic posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can always email us ideas for episodes, criticisms, or stories of personal encounters you've had with beavers at thefieldguides@gmail.com.
And parents, remember to get those kids outside. Let them get muddy and dirty and flip over rocks and logs. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Yep, see you next time.
And here is Violet to read this episode's patrons. But before she does, I just needed to say thank you to two of our new patrons. I didn't notice during recording that Steve combined their two names. So thank you individually to our new patrons, Kirill L. and to Emily. Thank you so much. And here's Violet with this episode's top patrons.
Alyssa, Eric, Adam, the Hebranks, Mary, Daniel M., Diane, Elizabeth, Jessica, Callie, Ken, Morgan, Orange Julianne, Rich K, Sean C, Susan. We named the dog Indy, JJ, Dwayne, Jonathan A, Andrew C, Andy T, Ben C, Bethany, Brandon, Bruce, Connor, Doodle Dude 82, Emily, Esther,
Give it a try.
Gregaria Papilloniidea,
That's pretty good. Let's go with it. Go ahead.
Gail and Mac, Gavin, Helen, J. Jean, Jack, Jeff, Jane, John W, Judy, Kazzies, Kelly, Quixote, Lauren, MD, Mark V, Matt, Max, Measure and Principal, Melissa Marie in Dusty, Arizona, Molly, Nathan, Nautical 3, Outside Chronicles, Rob M, Robert P, Sarah, Hannah.
That's everybody. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you to our top patrons. Steve and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for helping to make the Field Guides podcast possible.
Bye.
The Field Guides. I'm Bill, and I'm here with Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Bill.
What was I saying?
Wait, yeah. This is kind of why I was like, I'm like, I told you about last night and this morning. I'm like, yeah, I'm a little dead right now.
I'm totally drawing a blank.
Yeah. Good morning.
I'm gonna have to listen to one.
Yeah. What the heck? Good morning.
It's just gone. It's been so long.
Because it doesn't sound right to be like.